Welcome to New Rechts, or for our English listeners, New Right. My name is Daan de Liever, and today we're going to talk about the rising tension between Hungary and Ukraine, especially concerning the transport of Russian gas, as well as the tension that's, ever going at this point between Hungary and the European Union. And to discuss this topic, I'm pleased to once again talk to András László. Thank you for being here.
For the invitation. Nice to see you again.
And in our last conversation, we already talked about your personal background. So if people really want to know more about that, I would suggest them to go back to our previous interview. But in short, you are a member of the European Parliament for Fidesz. It's the current ruling party, Hungary, of Prime Minister Viktor Orban, that people will be familiar with. So I would say let's get into the details. Let's start with Hungary and Ukraine. Before we dive into the current situation, maybe you can tell me something about the relation between Hungary and Ukraine, how from your perception this historically, was, before we dive into the current situation.
Thank you very much. The Hungarian-Ukrainian relations were never easy. Ever since Ukraine became independent in the early 90s and Hungary was freed from the communist regime, and communist era and behind the Iron Curtain in 1990, our relations with all of our neighbors, where we had a significant Hungarian minority, were burdened by the rights of the Hungarian minorities in Romania, in Slovakia, in Ukraine, in Serbia. But we try to, get these relationships in order, have some bilateral agreements where we guarantee that we don't want a revision of borders. They should. We want good neighborly relations, but they should respect the cultural and linguistic rights of Hungarian minorities, who in many cities, villages, constitute, up to 90 or even 100% of the population. So there would be no reason why they should conduct their daily business in the local language instead of Hungarian. This was burdensome for many years with many countries, but we've managed to overcome these difficulties. We now have excellent relations with Serbia. We have the best relations we've ever had with Slovakia. We have a volatile but rather stable situation, I say, for Hungarian minorities in Romania. And we have the most volatile and the most difficult relationship in this regard with Ukraine. Ukraine is a country of 30 or 40 million, now maybe less of a population. And there's only like 150,000 Hungarians. Not like any kind of security threat or any other threat to Ukraine. Yet their rights in schooling, in education, in culture, their local organizations, mayors they have in Hungarian-dominated towns, they were regularly harassed by local Ukrainian nationalists, by Ukrainian authorities even. So this was always difficult, and it always burdened bilateral relations. Then, of course, when the Ukraine-Russia war started after the invasion of Russia, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, then Ukraine received a lot of diplomatic support from big Western countries, and they totally abandoned any kind of human rights approach and minority approach. And this made this situation very difficult. And of course, Hungary said, we see that everyone is sending weapons and giving all aid they can to Ukraine. We are ready to provide humanitarian aid. We are ready to provide fuel. We are ready to provide for refugees who enter Hungary. We have a direct border with Ukraine. So a lot of the Ukrainian refugees, or all refugees from Ukraine, not just Ukrainians, wanted to flee Ukraine. They were allowed to enter Hungary without any limits, and we tried to care for them as best as we could. And we still do so today because they're still arriving. Unfortunately, what President Zelensky thought that this is not enough. They want us to send weapons. They want us to allow weapons transit to Ukraine. Because we simply said this is not our war. And if we were to allow weapon shipments through Hungary into Ukraine, it would cross the region in Ukraine where most Hungarians live. So in terms of military logistics and weapon logistics, the region of the Hungarian minority in Ukraine becomes a valid military target. So we didn't want that for these two reasons. And ever since, our relationship is more difficult. Now that last year and this year, their political positions is not so favorable anymore in Europe and in Washington. They are less aggressive, but with the gas pipeline dispute at the end of last year and now with the cutoff of Russian transit gas through Ukraine into Hungary and into Slovakia, it is again straining our relations.
Vergeet de NOS en de NPO. Het is tijd voor Nieuw Rechts, de nieuwswebsite voor rechtsdenkend Nederland.
Thank you. I think that's a good context. If we get now into the gas situation, of course, like in 2019, so before the invasion of 2022, Russia and Ukraine signed this agreement, right, for transportation of Russian gas. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding of why this was actually signed and why this was, I guess, also in the interest of countries like Slovakia and Hungary. Maybe you can tell me your perspective on this agreement, why it started, and also, of course, why Zelensky decided to stop it 1st of January of this year.
Well, why Zelensky decided to stop it, I think it's best to see what Zelensky said about it. But here again, just to give your viewers an insight into the context. Hungary, Slovakia, Austria, and the Czech Republic, we are landlocked countries. We don't have seaports. So every gas or oil we import, whether it's crude oil or already processed refined oil products, they come through pipeline. Mm-hmm. Pipeline means we are dependent on neighboring countries providing the transit and allowing the transit. It's not like in the beginning of the war that, countries could build extra LNG ports and import LNG through ships from whatever part of the world. We cannot do that because we don't have seaports. Therefore, we have LNG terminals. We depend on someone else to build an LNG port, then build a pipeline with the capacity required to import the gas we have. Another context, which is very important, is that because of the Cold War, our countries only saw development of infrastructure connections from the Soviet Union, today's Russia, and Ukraine, into our countries. So all of the infrastructure was built from east, mm-hmm. stopping with Hungary, back then Czechoslovakia, Poland, etc. So we didn't have very good connections. We spent the last 25 years developing these connections more like north-south, also to be able to import gas from the west, from Austria, through Germany, through Austria, into Hungary, etc. But the basic energy infrastructure in Central Europe still very much is a consequence of the Cold War, mm-hmm. pipelines. And of course, these pipelines, after they are built and the initial investment was made, they allow for cheap transit of gas. Unlike LNG, where you need to spend a lot of energy, therefore a lot of money, to turn natural gas into liquid gas, mm-hmm. ship, then send the ship to an LNG port, which again you need to build, and then you transform it into gas, and then you send it through pipelines. This is much more to regasify it. It makes it much more expensive, and this is not an easy situation for us. In addition, because we depend on neighboring countries to acquire that, us to be a partner in building a pipeline project where we can import the LNG they have already imported. So that's the situation, and of course, at EU level, the European Union never adopted any sanctions on Russian gas, only oil and coal. So it would have been, it's totally legal mm-hmm. to gas. And in fact, in 2024, the EU as a whole increased gas imports from Russia.
But it's kind of weird. Why would they sanction Russian oil but not Russian gas? And why would they then themselves, I guess, even buy even more Russian gas? To me, it seems to make no sense. Can you explain why this is happening?
Well, oil is easier to ban and sanction because you just put it in an oil tanker and ship it into Europe. You don't need the whole from gas into liquid, then from liquid back to gas. Okay, so in that sense, importing oil had via ships and seaborne oil was much easier, and it had already a developed market with tankers, etc., for decades. That's how oil trade always happened, for most of it. Again, in Central Europe, because we don't have ports, but we did have pipelines built, we import our crude oil from Russia and we refine it in our refineries.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, we, countries without a seaports, we even had an exemption of the oil sanctions for this reason. And we are still allowed to import Russian crude oil and refine it.
That's good to know. That's I think that also gives a lot more context to the situation. What, as you're saying, I guess using this different strategy now, where Ukraine, I guess, blocked the Russian gas. What has the impact been on Hungary now that they had to find other ways to get this LNG into Hungary?
Well, it's not LNG into Hungary; it's just natural gas.
Oh yes, yes.
So what happened was, unfortunately, I cannot show you a map, but if anyone Googles it, the way it works, the pipelines, is that the gas infrastructure comes from Russia through Ukraine, and then just before it reaches the Hungarian and Slovakian borders, it splits into two. So it comes like this, and it splits into Slovakia and Hungary. And with Ukraine saying they are not willing to extend the transit contract for Russian gas, they basically cut off Slovakia. Hungary, on the other hand, there have been other pipeline projects through the Black Sea, through Turkey, up the Balkans into Hungary. And fortunately, this pipeline has already been built, so we have an alternative pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
This whole situation shows the fragility of landlocked countries when it comes to energy imports.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens now is that Hungary gets supplied same Russian gas, but not through the pipeline through Ukraine, but through another pipeline through the Balkans. Why this is important for us and for every landlocked country in Central Europe is because although the source of gas may be the same, but just the fact that you have alternative import infrastructure, import pipelines, different and connected to different networks, it still improves our energy security.
Mm-hmm.
It improves, or it would improve if we have different options, our leverage and our position when negotiating the price. Because if you only have one pipeline, then the seller knows and the transit country knows that they can basically ask for whatever they want, whatever price they want. And we had disputes with other EU countries because of this. But when you have more transit lines, also make a competition between the countries which are transiting the gas to your country. This is what we see. This is why we have been in the last 20 years developing a lot of interconnectors, both electricity and gas, for this specific reason, because you have more leverage, you have more negotiations on price, and you have more security of supply.
Very, very good point. I think that also gives a lot of more context to the situation. Why I guess it's, I guess for the Netherlands, of course, has a big harbor in Rotterdam. It's like maybe hard to imagine for people here that this is such a different situation for the Hungarian people compared to the Dutch people, of course. So thank you for that context. I also would say, besides the energy, you also see that politically now the tensions are rising. I saw recently, last Tuesday, that Orban also said that they will not allow Ukraine ever to join NATO. It will never be on the table. He said it, but of course with the Slovak Prime Minister Fico. So, do you think that even though the situation is going on, that there are ways for Hungary and Ukraine to improve their ties, or if not, what do you think that the development will be of the relationship this year?
Well, first and foremost, I hope that we will, after 3 years, we will finally see a negotiated end to this war. Unfortunately, European leaders didn't make too much effort. The most outspoken leaders in Europe for peace in Ukraine were Pope Francis and Prime Minister Viktor Orban. There were some, Olaf Scholz a few months ago did a phone call with President Putin. Early in the war, or just before, President Macron visited President Putin without any success. But then afterwards, for a very long time, this whole idea was totally abandoned. Mm-hmm. That Ukraine can win this war if it receives enough Western aid was basically the primary way of thinking in Western capitals. And unfortunately, in 3 years, this didn't materialize. No one won on the battlefield. And in fact, Ukraine is in a more difficult situation now than it was last year or the year before. And, at some point, we have to ask ourselves the question, how much longer do we want this war to go on? And are we finally willing to assess the sanction strategy, assess the war strategy, and even call it a war strategy, because I don't really see it. It's more like a competition of, it's more like a chicken game. Who says that I can take this longer and I can keep fighting this war longer in terms of resources? Fortunately, there's one resource where we have the least effect on, and that's the human resources of Ukraine to man the front lines. Everything else, of course, could be infinite. You take up loans, you could infinitely finance Ukraine. You could send weapons, etc. But even there, we are seeing the limits. First, the EU countries sent money from their own pockets. Then they sent from the European budget. Then when that money was no longer available, the joint European loan to finance Ukraine. And then when that wasn't possible anymore, it was a joint, loan based on the profits of frozen Russian assets in Western banks. So I would say even the money is not infinite. And when we look at the promise by a lot of European countries to supply Ukraine last March with 1 million artillery shells by last March, and they managed to only produce and deliver half of the quantity promised, there's even a severe limitation in terms of our industrial capacities. And so therefore, the way I see it, the longer this war drags on, the less favorable the situation will be for Ukraine, and therefore on the battlefield, and therefore the less favorable the situation for Ukraine, for Europe, and for the United States also at the negotiating.
That's a very good point. I think
about preferences or values or whatever. These are just the hard facts. If you become less capable to wage a war financially, with soldiers, with industrial capacity, obviously your position at the negotiating table will be worse.
True. How would you respond then, though, that I guess in Western media it's also spoken a lot about it. Also, Russia itself is also economically, but also in this war, I guess maybe they're not losing so much on the battleground, but their economy is also starting to hurt, which even I think even Putin himself also admitted, I think a few weeks ago. So this is, I guess, even though I guess I tend to agree that a peace would be better sooner than later, we still see that this is a very strong case that's being made in Europe.
Yeah, but if basically there are different estimations, but if the new Trump administration is going to suspend funding, which if I read correctly in the news has already done so, for 90 days, all foreign funding, and if we take into account that, of course, we could have more resources, financial resources, etc., if it was only Russia on the other side, then it would be a situation that's easier to estimate, when the other side runs out of resources.
Mm-hmm.
But the key is that since, other than the Western world, Japan, Australia included in the Western world, beyond the Western world, no one signed up to sanctions against Russia. In fact, a lot of countries stepped in as intermediaries for energy shipments and other trade with Russia. There's plenty of graphs about this online.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And also, if you take into consideration that Russia has been very successful diplomatically into drawing in more resources, whether it's military equipment or other equipment, from Iran, from North Korea, non-military stuff mostly from China, then what you see is that, well, you're not actually just waging a resource competition with Russia. You're doing it with also China, North Korea, Iran, and other countries which are still trading and are willing to continue this trade with Russia. And I want to open a not very small parenthesis, is that, as I said earlier, even Europe in 2024 has increased its gas imports from Russia compared to 2023. So we are also basically still continuing very important trade with Russia, not because most Western countries want to, but because they have no other choice. So reality will hit us in the face at some point.
That's true. I guess more and more people are daring to discuss this. I think if you would, like you said yourself, if last year or the year before, if you would discuss this, you would be seen as you're in the pocket of Putin. It's a crazy situation. But let's go back for a second to the relation with Hungary. Do you think, let's say, hopefully, God willingly, this year the war will end? How do you think that can be a recovery for the relation with Hungary? Because, like we discussed, it was already maybe historically complicated and challenging, but it's become more complicated, as you explained, since the war started. Do you think there's a good path forward for this relationship?
You mean the bilateral Hungarian-Ukrainian?
Yes.
I think there's a way forward. We want better relationship with Ukraine. We definitely want it. It's one of our neighboring countries. It's a big country. It's an important country. We want to develop trade. We want to develop relations. But we also want this war to end, which is now a major point of conflict between what we want and what the Ukrainian leadership wants. And we want Ukraine to guarantee the minority rights of Hungarian minority in Ukraine. Until we cannot, on these two major issues, we cannot come to an understanding, it will be very difficult. I think first we need to see an end to hostilities between Ukraine and Russia. And as soon as that happens, I think it opens the door for other issues as well, because that is now dominating the bilateral relationship of Ukraine with every country, including Hungary. I think it will be rebuilding Hungarian-Ukrainian relationship will be easier once the war is over. Just one additional thought to what you said about, if we would have talked about this 2 years ago. You're correct. But the sad part is that in the US, they were talking about these things even 2 years ago. They had a very pragmatic, interest-based approach to the Ukraine war. Even though there was also a very strong and passionate, emotional argument in the media in favor of giving unlimited support to Ukraine, the critical voices, much less so in Europe. I experienced it myself because I was trying to have these debates and have these discussions and hear these arguments and reason with others. It was impossible. It was impossible. And that just really shows what a bad state European politics is in, European media is in, that we cannot actually have in difficult periods of time. It's like, no, you can only do this. You can only say this. And it's kind of what it reminded me was the situation during COVID. No, you cannot be anti-vaccine. You cannot be anti-mask. You cannot be whatever. And it caused huge tension within societies and in politics. Yeah. And then it was a mistake. And then we did the same thing. We limited the discussion also on Ukraine and what European strategy should be. Very sad. So other than rebuilding the Hungarian-Ukrainian relationship, we also need to rebuild and relearn diplomacy in Europe.
I think that's a very good point that you're touching on here. Indeed, during COVID, we saw this, but we see it with many different policies. You see it when you talk about climate policy, like the Green Deal. You see it with immigration. You see it with so many issues that, to be honest, that are the sweetheart issues of a lot of left-wing politicians and media, that you're vilified for saying anything else. You see with Donald Trump, I literally saw there are literally articles in Dutch newspapers where they compare him to Hitler, to Mussolini, right now still. So it's in this sense it is sad, and I agree that we need to rebuild Europe in a sense culturally. Maybe we need to regain some of what made us great to begin with. And I think this is. That's also a good maybe point to talk a little bit about the European Union in the relationship with Hungary itself, because there's a tension between the two ways we're talking, right? The one way is where criticism is allowed, one is not, which is more of a symptom of these two different worldviews or systems. We talked a little bit about it last time. How has it developed now, the relation with European Union and Hungary since then?
I think it's worse. I can't remember exactly when we were speaking, but basically we got a 200 million euro fine last June for not allowing illegal immigrants into the Schengen area through the Serbian-Hungarian border. And in addition, that sentence to the 200 million, we have a 1 million euro per day until we don't abide and we don't let illegal immigrants into the EU. 1 million per day since June. We are now receiving from the European Commission letters saying that every 2 months that another 60 million euro fine was added, 2 months, 60 days, so 60 million. And it's a call to pay. And we refuse to pay. So what they're saying is that, well, then they will withdraw it from the funds they would be transferring to Hungary. Transferring any funds to Hungary, it's mostly frozen. It has become really an absurd game of blackmail on behalf of the European Commission. And of course, we think time is on our side, because in 10 years, I think it is now pretty obvious that we won the migration debate. The European Commission is unwilling to change its policy. In fact, it's moving forward with the EU Migration and Asylum Pact, which includes mandatory relocation. If countries refuse, you have to pay 20,000 euros per migrant if you refuse to receive them. And the EU, we will have a debate about this in the European Parliament just this afternoon, is willing and discussing the financing of border walls in Europe, but not Hungary. We spent 2 billion euros in 10 years in defending the Hungarian and Schengen border. We have received about 1% of financial aid for that from the European Union. That's crazy. They should be helping Finland, the Baltics, Poland in building fences and defending the border, maybe also Spain and other countries, but not Hungary. So this is the state of affairs right now between Hungary and Ukraine. And of course, they also refused some of the legal reforms we proposed to do and in fact enacted. They still refuse to allow Hungarian universities back into the Erasmus program, Hungarian researchers into the Horizon program, which is the budget for research and technology at European level. And they are now saying that with the end of the year, we have lost 1 billion euro of European funds, which were meant for Hungary. And of course, we're saying, no. We are continuing negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
You have no more access to that 1 billion from the fund where they blocked us from.
Mm-hmm.
Negotiated at the latest when the new European 7-year budget negotiations begin, that we want the compensation. So it will be, I think, the time to overcome the European-Hungarian relations, the EU-Hungarian relations will be, overcome our difficulties, will be the negotiations of the next European budget.
And when is this next European budget?
Well, it should be starting end of this year, next year. It should, because it takes a long time to prepare the European budget. Preliminary talks will soon begin.
It's, but then if they, I guess, have quite a lot of power, I guess you saw with the previous Polish government, you're seeing with the Hungarian governments that don't want to fall in line, basically, to let's just call it left-wing ideology. Then at that point, they have quite some power, right, to push you. Do you think Hungary actually has a good chance in these upcoming negotiations to get back this money that's been taken from Hungary in the European budget?
A lot of the decision, there's a series of decisions to be taken when a new European budget is decided, and several of them require unanimity.
Ah, yes. Okay.
It has to come to this, yeah. But that's the reality, and we will be hard negotiating for our interest.
I understand. I think that's as a representative of Hungary, that's your duty, right, to look out for Hungarian interest.
Wrong. We've done nothing wrong. We defended the Hungarian and the Schengen border against illegal immigration.
Mm-hmm.
Asked for help. Some countries on the bilateral level, they sent police forces to help patrol the border. You know, we asked for help from the Commission to give us money for the technology installed on the border, for the fence, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. But they actually drafted all migration regulation to allow illegal immigrants in, because they fully know that it's impossible to deport them, because countries will not, their countries of origin will not accept them, only in very, very small numbers. They throw away their documents. So first of all, you have to prove where they come from. And the return rates for illegals who are already in the EU is about 10% or less. That's why we're saying we're not taking any illegals. If someone applies for asylum and we grant it, then they should enter.
Yes.
But if you enter illegally, you're already breaking the law.
Yes.
That's not the way to apply for asylum and to have an honest discussion about your protection.
It's common sense, right? If you there's a reason why it's called illegal, because in any other country, like if you try this in China, I would say good luck to you. Or in some Arab countries or many countries around the world, border is there for a fact, for a reason. So you have some control over your own national sovereignty. So it makes sense. Are you hopeful with also more right-wing parties becoming bigger in Europe? Of course, we have upcoming German elections where AfD will probably get much larger. We have also French, I think, next year coming up. So I assume that right-wing parties will do quite well in all these elections. We saw it in Austria as well. Do you think this will improve the relations between Europe and Hungary?
I think so. The Patriots was created in summer after the European elections. We are in alliance with the PVV, Party of Fair Fielders. We are in alliance with FPÖ in Austria, who are very likely to now give the Chancellor of Austria. So that will be an extra Patriots leader seat at the European Council, the leaders meeting. So I'm very optimistic. Also, the change in Washington is very inspiring. Now, of course, we will have our difficulties with that, but that's another story.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that in the US, they're going to be fighting against woke ideology. And let's be honest, woke ideology spilled over from the US into Europe.
Yes.
Now we really need the anti-woke movement to spill over to Europe. We have the open borders policy promoted by George Soros in Europe and in Brussels.
Mm-hmm.
Meetings with the highest level of European Commission leaders, several of them, with Juncker, with von der Leyen, etc. And now we will have an anti-immigration, anti-illegal immigration government in the US. We need that policy as well to spill over into Europe. They had a pro-censorship government in the US under Biden and the Democrats. Now Zuckerberg also announced, Google also announced they will be cutting back on filtering content and automatic filtering and censorship. We need that as well to spill over into Europe.
Definitely, I agree. We see it all over Europe that the tendency is not there yet, but let's hope indeed that that we'll look back on this period as a temporary thing. I really want to thank you for this interview. If people want to follow more of your work and what you have to say, where can they do that?
I'm usually on X. I post almost all of my content in English on X, which is at LASZLOAN. That's my name, or you can just search András László MEP. You'll probably find me. And yeah, on the other channels I post in Hungarian, so it's not easy to follow.
Thank you. Yeah, Hungarian I've heard is one of the most difficult languages in general. So that will be, unless some Dutch people randomly speak Hungarian, I don't. So then it will be difficult, yes.
Yeah. So thank you for this opportunity and a very successful and let's hope a year of peace for Europe for 2025. I wish the best for your Dutch viewers, yourself, and also for Europe.
Thank you. I agree. And I also really want to thank our listeners and readers. If you want to make these kind of conversations possible, please consider subscribing at nieuwrechts.nl, or you can also follow us on our social media. Every bit will help us. So thank you and see you in the next time.
Thank you.